The year was 1986. I was already a big Ghostbusters fan. I heard about this movie coming out that would star Rick Moranis. Bill Murray was also in it. And Frank Oz was directing it, the guy from the Muppets. And Steve Martin was in it. My sister was a big Steve Martin fan, so I'd seen a lot of his movies and SNL performances and things like that. And it was a musical, so Steve Martin was going to be singing this dentist thing, and that brought to mind Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, where he did Maxwell's Silver Hammer. Maxwell Edison majoring in medicine. So, yeah, I was going to go see Little Shop of Horrors. There was no denying it. Flash forward 3 years. I've watched the crap out of this movie on cable, and I find out that a local theater called the Zodiac Theater is holding auditions for a stage production of the original off-Broadway musical. So, which was based on the 1960 film with Jack Nicholson, but that really doesn't enter into this story. So, I auditioned. I got a couple of minor roles. You can do this show with half a dozen actors, I think. It can be done, very, very few people. And it'll list a guy in the credits as, Skip Snip, Mrs. Booth, everyone else. And that's actually, sort of the charm of the show. I think the two winos are the puppeteer and the voice of the plant. I can't remember how it goes. But anyway, but this particular production was not being done like that. So I wound up in this role of Skip Snip, and I was one of the winos. And then, they also threw in the Bill Murray character, who was not in the movie. And I managed to land that role. I was very happy with that. 2 days before we opened, the director kicked out the guy playing the voice of the plant. And I was 19 years old. I was skinny at the time. And I'm this white kid, but I could do a okay tenor imitation of the voice from the movie. And so by dint of the fact that I could kind of do the voice and my characters were not in any scenes with the plant, thankfully, because of the way the play was constructed, for one person to play all these minor pop-up roles that don't recur, at the last second, I was able to maneuver into the role of the plant. I didn't think anything big about it. 2 years later, 1991, the same director did the show at a different venue and asked me back. So I thought, well, I must have done something good with the voice of the plant the first time. Matter of fact, 2008, he did it at a third venue locally before he moved off to Nashville, and I was invited back once again to play the voice of the plant in Little Shop of Horrors. And I always got to play the Bill Murray character too, so that was always fun for me. Now, at 19 I played the role, and at 38 I played the role, and I'm like, this is... I don't seem to be progressing theatrically, but I can trace my love of live theater, my love of doing plays, my love of directing, my love of improv. All these things can be traced back to the fact that I wanted to go see a movie because of Ghostbusters. But anyway, so in 2011, a friend of mine that was on the board at the Shoals Theater asked me, if they do Little Shop next year, would you be willing to direct? And I thought about it for about 30 seconds. I said, oh no, I've seen that show intimately. It's too huge for me. It's beyond my talent. I'd done like 5 plays that were very small, casts, single sets basically, nothing with music, nothing with puppets. I was like, I don't think I can. And about 30 seconds later, my brain went, if you don't do it, who will? Who do you trust locally to do this show, if not you? And if not the guy that's now moved to Nashville that can't do it. And I said, I'll do it. So I had been thinking sort of in the back of my brain about Little Shop for a long time and sort of dream casting it, as you do, from the people that you know. If I ever do Little Shop, who would I? I go home, tell my wife they're thinking about doing Little Shop of Horrors. The first thing she said was, well, you know who your Audrey is. Amber Rhodes, who you've seen in some of my past videos, was the person that I really hoped for to play Audrey, and mentally had cast her in that role for a very long time. And then when she found out months in advance, months before the auditions, that the show was actually going to happen, she was like, what age range are you looking for Audrey? So I knew she was interested, and I tried not to tip my hand that, say the word and you're the part. But I did. I held my auditions and she came to them, and I looked at everybody, and I had one other really strong contender who I think I hurt her feelings by not casting her in the role. But she could have played Audrey. Amber was Audrey, if that makes sense. It's one of those hard things to define as a director, and I just felt like Amber had a tiny bit stronger voice. Still, though, if Amber broke her ankle, that's who I would have called, was the other one. But, so we're doing the show, and I had some ideas for some of the puppets and things that I wanted to make things a little different than I'd seen them in past productions. They come in with the puppet, and he's little bit, it's called Pod 1, and they stick him upstage in a window box to hide the puppeteer underneath. And Seymour keeps talking to the puppet, and he's turning 3/4 away from the audience. You're losing voice, you're losing face. So what I did was I moved that puppet from out of the window to a table center stage and had Seymour naturally facing the puppet, and therefore he's also naturally facing the entire house. They can see his face, they can hear his voice better. We were mic'd, but it doesn't matter. And so I came up with this bizarre idea to build a table that would hide a puppeteer laying on his side in the fetal position doing the puppetry, and you could still see the legs of the table, you could still see the people behind, and we made a tablecloth that went just far enough to hide that body in there. Right before the show opened, we realized, hey, whoever does that puppetry at the end of the 4th song of the show has to be in that table from opening curtain. Have to be in there about 20 minutes to do 30 seconds of puppetry. So I laid down on the floor in the fetal position. I told my friend Rob, who was building things for me, I said, just measure me. I'm going to play this part myself. I'm not going to subject anybody to claustrophobia. I know I don't have claustrophobia. I'll be fine. So I did that puppetry in Pod 1. And then for Pod 3, my friend John Givens really wanted to do Feed Me, which is Pod 3, the one that's a man-sized puppet that you're inside of. And we came up with some leaves that were behind that puppet undulating, and I played the arms of that the leaves of that puppet, which was, in the end analysis, way closer to John than I ever wanted to get in my life, because we had John was so tall that even when he bent forward at the waist to be the puppet, he was still slightly taller than the actor playing Seymour. So we tricked it. We had a section of the floor of the shop that would slide back, and John was actually standing in a 12-inch hole, which brought him then down to perfect eye line with Seymour. So he's singing the plant part, and Seymour's doing Seymour's part, and they're making eye contact. And even people that were involved in the show never questioned it. They were like, wait, you did what? I'm like, yeah, we couldn't cut 12 inches off the bottoms of John's legs. I asked. He wouldn't let me. So we dropped him in a hole for that shot. So John's in the hole, and I'm kneeling behind him being the puppets, which put my face at his butt the entire time. So hey, sometimes you take one for the show. Anyway, then Pod 4 was the Volkswagen-sized puppet, and this thing is a monster. It's suspended from above to keep the weight off of the puppeteer, and it weighs about 140 pounds. Now, I had an idea because of past shows that I had seen that they had it suspended and tried to hide it with vines, and then they just quit doing that and they would just hang it off of the beam. The theater I was in didn't have a fly system and didn't have, weights to hold stuff in the ceiling. It was a converted movie house. So that ceiling was never designed for something like that. So what I came up with was a boom arm that came out the back of the puppet, still suspended it from the top point, and then the plant has to eat people. So because of the way this plant was constructed 25 years earlier, same puppet that I had been the voice of in 1991, I was using the exact same puppets. Because of its construction, if it tried to eat somebody at human height, they were going to rip through the lower jaw of the puppet. It wasn't built for that kind of stresses. It was built to be as lightweight as possible and as mobile as possible. So you always had to put the lower jaw on the stage floor and have the people crawl through, and the plant would eat them. They would go out a little trapdoor in the back, or a little fabric trapdoor in the back. So I said, well, it's got to be up high for speaking height, singing height, and then it's got to be down for eating height. And we need like a boom that can transition through that, and maybe it needs to come forward, so maybe it would have some wheels and everything. And I doodled this sketch and I gave it to Rob, and Rob looked at it and he goes, that's something. You've made something. And about, 15 minutes later, he said, It's an engine hoist. You've drawn an engine hoist. He makes a phone call. Some buddy of his delivers an engine hoist to the back of the theater. Rob cuts a boom arm out of 2x4, and we're up and running with the puppet functional on the first day. And it was great. We didn't have to do, all the lower the beam down and attach the puppet to it, and all the stuff that had slowed down the intermission of previous productions. We had that puppet out there and working. However, because of their designs, the puppet is a different system than what you're expecting. You're keeping its mouth shut until it speaks, and then you have to anticipate and stop holding the jaw shut and let it drop, and then push it closed. So it's a backwards puppetry system. It doesn't work like a traditional puppet where you open and close on the syllable. You're anticipating and closing to get a good lip sync. And for whatever reason, I guess because I knew the lines or I had done the show so many times as an actor, one night John had to leave early and I stepped into Pod 4 and I did the puppet, and everybody said, wow, John was on fire with the puppet, with the lip sync tonight. He was doing so good. And Emily, the voice of the plant, she knew that I was the one puppeteering it. She's like, can you please do that in the show? Because I felt it worked so much better for me. So I talked to John. I said, would it bother you if I did Pod 4? And John said, no, absolutely not. That's fine. So at the 11th hour, I wound up playing Pod 1, part of Pod 3, and Pod 4 for the second act. Now, Pod 2 is a trick. And this is a replica of the Pod 2 that was 25 years old when we did this. And originally, the one that Ryan Sims built was a fake arm on a jacket that came down here, and the puppeteer's real hand went in the side here and puppeteered it, and Seymour's the only one that puppeteers that one. But I felt like after about 30 seconds, the audience figured out what that trick was, and then you had to watch him do it for like 5 more minutes of a number that's not even in the movie. So I had this wild idea. I said, we're going to do a bait and switch. We're going to show them a puppet that's operated one way, where they come in, set it down on a table, and somebody underneath there starts operating this puppet. Then they pick it up and they leave, and then Seymour goes behind something. They rip that jacket off of him. They put on the jacket with the fake arm. He comes out, and now it's being operated a different way. Ha ha! We're going to do a Jim Henson trick. We're going to keep changing the method so they don't quite know what's happening. And the idea was more elaborate than that. Then Seymour was going to exit again while the girls were singing their song and make a change back and set this puppet down on a little trash can or whatever. And Zach was, how old were you in 2000? What's the year on this? What year did we do Little Shop? 2012?
I think so.
You would have been 10. So Zach was going to be hidden inside this thing. One problem. Once you put Zach inside the garbage can and put his shoulder up to the trap door and all the way up through this giant plastic pot, I don't know how Jamie matches. Jamie Hitchcock in Nashville made me a replica puppet of the one that Ryan Sims made. She even tracked down the exact same materials. The only thing is this one wasn't, sun faded and worn. And she built this in a week's time. Now I paid her with part of my director's fee instead of part of the construction budget for the show, so I would get to keep this as a souvenir. Haha, I'm no dummy. But because we matched the existing pot, Zach's arm wasn't long enough to do much more than go up in here and just wiggle the top of the puppet, and it wouldn't work and everything. So she even built me an extra leaf, as you can see, just in case. So at the 11th hour, Zach couldn't do that other piece of puppetry in that shot, and I said, we'll find something for you. We'll find a place for you. While I was in pre-production on this, I went back and I watched the movie again, and I listened to the director's commentary track, and he talked about a scene where he had Steve Martin, Bill Murray, and Rick Moranis do as many improvised endings to the scene as possible. And I thought, improvise? I act with a local improv troupe, the Wickets. I should totally incorporate that into this show. So what I wound up doing was, and this was also auditioned, I mean, I kind of chose who went best where. I really wanted Wes Thompson to play the Bill Murray part. I put Michael Hill as the dentist, and he was wildly inventive with this. And the two of them were neighbors. So they were like, hey, does it bother you if we just don't rehearse our scene and just bring it on the night? I'm like, sure, go ahead, fine. So the Bill Murray and Steve Martin scene was a revelation to me every night, especially the night when Wes kissed him on the lips. But anyway, so And then Patrick Alexander played the Patrick Martin role and was also a puppeteer in one scene. And Adam Neal came in as the John Candy role, which he didn't do what John Candy does in the movie, but I wanted to have the radio station actually be a scene so that we could bring this puppet in and set it on the table. And on the way to the theater one day, passing the sign that said downtown, which I thought was great, I find this house and they're throwing out a sewing table. With a big hole right in the middle of the table. Didn't have the sewing machine attached anymore, just the table. I said, I'm bringing somebody back from the theater to come get this. And they're like, well, this is a one-way street. Why don't we just put it in our truck and follow you? I'm like, okay. So we put this sewing table in this set, cut a hole in the wall behind. Patrick would kneel down, stick his arm in the hole, up through the table, and operate this puppet, while Seymour, played by Dylan Green, and Adam Neal had a little scene at the radio station being interviewed. And it never really occurred to me before how funny the line is in the movie when John Candy says, wow, I wish you folks at home could see this. Why did Seymour take the plant on radio with him? It makes no sense. So when I was interviewed about the upcoming play by my good friend Josie Lane on radio, I took this puppet with me. So, sets it down. Patrick is under the table, puts his arm up in here through the puppet, and is trying to, attack the radio announcer while Seymour is talking. And then Seymour picks it up, leaves. Also, I have to say it right, Diane Hall, who's Michael Hill's mom. I know, she remarried and only had to change one letter in her name. It always confuses me. She matched the jacket from 25 years before, found a jacket very similar at a thrift store and dyed it orange to match. It was almost identical. And the fact that the audience never saw both at the same time made the handoffs really, really good. So he re-enters now with a 25-year-old puppet and does the fake arm and everything. The illusion was so effective that I had people after the show ask me, now that puppet in the radio scene and right after that Seymour was carrying, that was a radio-controlled puppet, right? No, that was human-operated. The fact that we changed the method just the one time, we didn't even do the change and the change and the change like I had hoped to do, changing the method just the one time sold the illusion that this puppet was autonomous and not being operated by the person carrying it with a fake arm attached. So the benefit of me replacing John inside Pod 4 was John's such a big guy, Zach couldn't be in there to operate this tongue of Pod 4, which was an idea that I had. There was just no space. When I took over Pod 4, I'm not nearly as tall as John, so there was space beside me, and Zach could get inside Pod 4. I'm operating the jaws and the gross movements of the thing, and he would stand right beside me and operate the tongue and make the tongue undulate and everything. It was a really great extra effect that happened for us at the last second. My camera is doing all kinds of blinking at me. I think it's running out of battery. So, in using the same puppets I'd seen before, there was a problem with Pod 4 in the 2008 show. A piece of pipe, plastic piping, in approximately this location had become crimped over the years. When you would try to shut the jaw, which was pushing the bottom of the jaw upwards, then that crimp transferred your power to the crimp instead of to the jaw, the lips closing. And so the puppet kept doing it. Every time the puppet would talk, it had this, lip thing happening. I didn't think it was very effective, so I knew Donnie Bryan in Nashville had refurbed the puppets for his February 2012 show, and he invited me to come take a look at them up there. I had Jamie meet me. She looked over the Pod 2 so she could do her replica, and John went with me, and we sort of had a day exploring his theater and his shows, his leftover props and things, and wound up scavenging a bunch of stuff, wigs and telephones and all these things from his production. So my prop budget was way down. My transportation budget was way up because we made like 6 trips to Nashville to get stuff. But anyway, so we had the big puppet and the jaw problem happening. I knew Donnie had already, refurbished these a little bit with Ryan's permission. So I crawled inside this thing with my Dremel, and I'm cutting through this 25-year-old black plastic tubing and actually burned out the motor on a Dremel that I'd had for years and years. Had to go buy a new Dremel and everything. And I put a section of broom handle in there, just about yay long, that would, keep that piece rigid, and then I, put it back inside the plastic tubes and then put a lot of duct tape on it. Wood, I thought, would keep the weight down, but be nice and strong, and, boom, we were up and running, and the thing now had this powerful lower jaw. So, battery exhausted. I hope the other... Now, when Amber auditioned for the show, she was unaware that the ending of the stage show is different from the movie. People didn't like the ending in the movie, so they had to change the ending when they test screened it. So, she didn't know that her character would have, spoiler alert, a death scene. So, I have to tell her about this, and luckily, there was a leaked black and white version of it online. I showed her that. She said, "Oh my God, this is so beautiful." Battery exhausted. Well, I didn't get this video finished yesterday like I had hoped to before I went to go see a production of Little Shop, but more on that later. So, Amber auditions for the show. She doesn't know that her character has a, spoiler alert, death scene. And so I showed her a black and white version of the original ending that was online. You want to talk about synchronicity? The exact same week of this show, in October 2012, was when they finally released the Blu-ray with the original ending. That was never available publicly until the exact same week of the show. I did not choose that week for that show. They were trying to do something sort of Halloween themed in October. The theater board chose that, completely independent of me. Matter of fact, we took off the Saturday before we opened because I wanted to go to Nashville and meet Ernie Hudson for the first time. So yeah, the dates were selected for me. And just so happened that they brought out the movie for the first time on Blu-ray with the original ending. So, in that death scene in the movie, which Amber loved. She thought Ellen Green's performance was pitch perfect. She wanted to do her homage to it, and absolutely knocked it out of the park every single night. But Audrey gets eaten feet first by the plant, and then the last thing is her hand sort of sliding down the gullet. And we thought, we've got to do that. We've got to do that. So Emily, who was the voice of the plant, would come back there with me, and while I'm laying on my side making the top jaw eat, she would take Amber by the ankles and very slowly slide her down the gullet and out through the fabric trapdoor and the back of the set. And it worked like a charm almost every night. And then this is the payoff for several things I've told you in this video. That particular night, we had one little tiny glitch in the dark, and I realized that Emily has Amber's ankles on either side of that recently reinforced wooden beam. Yeah, she's not gonna get much farther, and she's not gonna be happy about it. And so I'm like making the thing chomp with my left arm, and I'm like, what are we gonna do? What are we gonna do? This is timed to the music. We don't have a lot of, leeway here, and we can't communicate it to the band that we need to vamp or anything. And desperation, the motherhood of invention, I shoved my hand into the tongue. Zach wasn't in there at the time because when the thing was down to half size, he would always step out. I jam my hand in the tongue, grab Amber's left leg, and maneuver it up and around the right leg. I'm like, go, 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 go. And Emily pulls her the rest of the way out. Now, from Amber's point of view, this has never happened before, and suddenly the puppet, the plant, Pod 4, this Volkswagen-sized thing, is licking her legs. And she sits up beside me and she says, "What was that about?" And I'm like, "I'll explain later." Go. So we finished that scene, and then this was always the fun part because we discovered that boom arm, you could lower the puppet very slowly to the ground when you release the hydraulic pressure, but then you would have to ratchet the puppet back up into place. And so guess what we had to do? We would have to unhook the puppet from the boom arm for me to physically lower 140 pounds to the ground. And then guess what? I would have to, from inside of it, snatch and jerk this thing up and hold it long enough for them to clip it back onto the boom arm. So yeah, I got quite a workout on the show. I lost 2 inches off my waist the week of that show, just maneuvering that 140 pounds for 3 eating scenes like that. So, all right. Amber then later, I do explain to her what was about to happen with the reinforced wooden beam, and she goes, thank you. So, it's one of my favorite stories about Little Shop of Horrors. So, I started this video yesterday, the batteries kept dying, and I ran out of time. I didn't know if I was going to be able to attend a performance of Little Shop of Horrors at the University of North Alabama, which was my alma mater. And at the absolute last second, about 10 minutes before curtain, I was able to speak to my manager at work and told them I was gonna be about 25 minutes late if I go and see this play, and they were like, that's fine, we don't mind. And so I jumped in the car wearing this shirt. I head to the theater, paid my ticket with the $5 alum fee, and go in the door, and the show's already started. The girls, Crystal Chiffon and Ronette, were singing the opening song, which basically means I had missed the Voice Not Unlike God's on the 23rd day of the month of September in an early year. I'd missed that part. No big whoop. And so I just went down when my eyes adjusted to the lights and found a seat and sat down, F33, all by myself. At intermission, I bump into Brandon Ballantyne. I'm coming out of the men's room as he's going in. So we compared notes on a couple of things briefly because he had seen the 2012 show and helped me promote it. So he actually had a t-shirt like this. He goes, I should have worn my shirt. And then I realized, boom, there's Amber Rhodes. Now, she had gone and seen the Friday show. I had seen her post about it on social media, so I was not expecting to bump into her. And so she has me come sit more center of the house with her and her sons and the group of people that were with them. And so that was nice. Then for the entire second act, I no longer felt self-conscious about mouthing along to every line of dialogue because she was doing it too. So that was very, very cool. Got to see the second act of Little Shop with my Audrey yesterday, right in the middle of shooting this video for you. Matter of fact, here's a picture of me and Amber after the show, and this was taken by Laura Conley, who played customer number 1 in the very first production I was ever in back in 1989. I hope you've enjoyed this. I have many more stories about Little Shop of Horrors from the various productions that I've been involved with, so if something like this interests you, let me know, and I will try to tell you more of the stories. Thanks for watching.